Hi, this is Corey Poirier, author of The Enlightened Passenger and podcast host of Let's Do Influencing and the CEO and founder of Blue Talks. On my episode for the Business Growth Architect Show, I will share how you can mix synchronicity, spirituality, and strategy, and how it will help your impact, and how it also helped me interview names like Deepak Chopra and Tommy Chong and Jack Canfield and Lisa Nichols to the tune of 7,500 interviews. And what I'm hoping you'll do after you listen to the episode is maybe you'll grab a copy of my brand new book, The Enlightened Passenger, and also get the bonuses that we decide to offer with the release of the book. Thanks, everybody.
And hello, fabulous person. BeateChelette here. I am the host of the Business Growth Architect Show, and I want to welcome you to today's episode where we discuss how to navigate strategy and spirituality to achieve time and financial freedom. Truly successful people have learned how to master both. A clear intention and a strategy to execute that in a spiritual practice that will help them to stay in alignment and on purpose. Please enjoy the show and listen to what our guest today has to say about this very topic. Welcome back. This is your host, BeateChelette, for the Business Growth Architect Show. And today you are in for a serious treat because we're going to talk strategy and spirituality like you haven't seen it before. With me today is Corey Poirier, who is the author of The Enlightened Passenger, multiple TEDx speaker. I mean, the list of accomplishments is longer than we have time for on this show. And he's about to publish this amazing book right now. And I'm so excited to have him on the show. Corey, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Beata. I'm super stoked to be here.
So for somebody who has never heard about you, tell us a little bit about who you are and what is the problem that you solve for your clients.
Wow. So who I am, it's sometimes hard to kind of, I'll say, sum that up in a line. But as far as my origin story that brings me to who I am today, I grew up in a small town. I found my way back to the small town. I live here now, but I was raised by a single mother, barely graduated high school. When I did graduate, I didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Didn't read my first book until age 27. So that's my origin story. Who I feel I am today, to some degree, is a person that's trying to impact lives in a positive way. I often say I'm trying to create a positive ripple in the world, and that could be a visible or an invisible impact, meaning you do something that you may never know that you impacted somebody's life. And sometimes you find out years later because somebody will send a message and saying, this thing you said at my college this many years ago made this difference. So as you said, I mean, I'm a speaker, which involved TEDx talks, speaking at some of the universities that when I was younger thought wouldn't be possible to speak at, and author, podcaster, interviewer. And I became obsessed a while back with interviewing people. So now it's hit like 7,500 people because I just became absolutely insanely obsessed over it. The first two books I ever read were How to Win Friends by Dale Carnegie and Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And most often I get compared to Napoleon Hill because of the interviews, because he did a similar thing. So that's kind of who I am. And I guess the problem that I solve is people, I feel, want the shortcut. And I don't necessarily want people to take a complete shortcut, meaning like avoid doing the thing. But ultimately, I'm trying to help people take the shortcut. So the shortcut is, if I've interviewed 7,500 people and I can tell you the top 5 things they do, and it's across the board, let's say 90% of them do it, and that's who you want to become, why wouldn't you want to take the shortcut and practice what they're practicing? That's one side of it. The other side is we have a brand called Blue Talks, and within that brand, we have 4 platforms. So live stage, book, podcast, and virtual stage. And we bring people onto the platform and try to help them become the instant expert in the eyes of their clients. So I kind of compare it to like when an actor wins an Academy Award, they get better scripts, they get more money, they're viewed differently. We try to help you do that by getting you on stages like, speaking at our event at, let's say, Columbia or Oxford or Harvard, getting you to share the bill with, say, Les Brown or Jack Canfield or Lisa Nichols, getting you to co-author a book with, say, Dr. Joe Vitale, and then getting you featured on Apple, Roku, Amazon, Google Play, all the places in about 4 months, 3 or 4 months. And so I feel that's when I say that shortcut, that really shortcuts your journey because we're allowing you to do what it took me 15 years for me to do in real time. And I feel then accelerate your credibility in the eyes of potential clients. So that's, I think, the problem we solve.
I like that a lot. And will you just tell us what BLUE stands for?
I will. It stands for business, life, universe.
Excellent. So, one of the things that I find really fascinating about you, so when I did my research and I looked into some of the things you do, that we know a lot of the same people. I was in a mastermind with Les Brown, and I looked at the list of some of the people that you've interviewed. I did not go through all 7,500, but we're talking Lisa Nichols, we're talking Jack Canfield, we're talking authors that wrote books like The Celestine Prophecy, Donald Neil Walsh, Conversations with God, which was an instrumental book in automatic writing, that really changed a lot for me in understanding how to open the download when information is kind of coming in. So I want to talk first a little bit about strategy. So the strategy that when you set out and you first realized that you can do anything you put your mind to, how did you get to this point, or what was it? Because it's a pretty ballsy move, if you don't mind me saying that, to go say, I'm going after Jack Canfield, I'm going after Lisa Nichols, I'm going after Donald Neil Walsh. I mean, you're going after the heavy hitters in the industry. How the heck did you do that?
So there's I'll call it the sexy answer, and then there's the non-sexy answer. So the non-sexy answer first is, I did write a list of the top 100 people I want to interview when I first started, and then I became like a bulldog to figure out how to interview them. So the non-sexy answer is, and this wasn't immediate because I didn't even know this at first. I honestly put in the time, and I did what I might call depositing. So I kept depositing for them. I kept giving to them. Like Gary Vee had this book, Jab, 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 Right Hook, which stood for give, give, give before you ask. So that's what I did. I kept giving and figuring out ways I could give to these people that don't really need a whole lot, so that eventually, if I wanted to ask, they'd be more than happy to want to help. It was almost like, I need to give this guy back because he's helped me so much. And there's a great quote by a guy named Alex Hormozy. And he said, the longer you delay your ask, the bigger your ask can be. And so, as an example, Mark Victor Hansen, if I grab Mark's name. So Mark Victor Hansen, I interviewed multiple times, and not only did I not ask for anything, but during the interview, one of our interviews, Mark and Crystal were on, and Mark said, Corey, we're doing a bunch of interviews for our new book called Ask, ironically, and we want to get on other big shows. Feel free to refer us to any. And he was saying that on each show we get on. Obviously, it's if you're on with other show, like if you're on with a host like yourself, and you ask, hey, who else could you recommend me to? And Mark's got a big name, so the recommendation's a win-win, because the podcaster's like, yeah, I would love to have Mark on my show. And so what I did was, I literally, within about a week, I dropped 25 shows on Mark and Crystal. They had
Wow.
told me, feel free to connect us. And the hosts were really grateful to me too, but I did pick big shows. And then that was done. And then I reached out maybe 6 months later and say, hey, Mark, just wondering if you want to get on more shows. Let me know at any point so I can make the recommendation. They were ready to do a few more, so I connected a few more. I did that for probably a year and a half before I ever asked Mark even for an endorsement on something. Nothing. Like, there was nothing I asked for at all. And then the first ask I had was, we were running an event at MIT, and I asked if he'd be willing to do a live Q&A via Zoom. So he didn't have to travel there, but live via Zoom. And he said he would, and I won't get into details because it's his numbers, but he told me what he normally charges, because I had asked him for another client for a similar thing. Anyway, all I can tell you is I paid a lot less than that. And if I recall correctly, at first he was hesitant about taking anything. And so what I'm saying is, I delayed my ask a year and a half or whatever it was. And then when I finally asked, he wanted to help. And then, one of the things we asked about was a big documentary we were working on that got sidelined for COVID. So like, we were talking about, if the documentary, if we pitched it at that time, we were pitching it to like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. So, he was going to potentially be in the next Secret. And so we're not talking small things I was trying to do to give for him. And then since that time, I interviewed him recently he lives in Arizona. So I interviewed in Arizona, and we're getting soon the video ready of the interview, and it was at a podcast station, but it was a video interview, and he wants to be able to leverage that video. So did that for him. I connected him with somebody else on the book side, because he has a book publishing entity now. So I'm going into all the details to say I gave and gave. And then, so whenever I asked him to endorse this book that we talked about that I just wrote, he literally said, what's it about? Tell me about the book. So we were on the phone, talked a bit about the book, and then he said, okay, press record. And then he recorded his endorsement for me on audio. And so now he's endorsing the book. Next thing we're doing is we're doing Richard Paul Evans, who wrote the foreword, 46-time New York Times bestselling author. We're going to Richard's retreat in June at near Zion National Park. And so what we're doing is I'm going to be there interviewing Richard in front of the other people who paid to be at the retreat, and Mark and Crystal will be on Zoom with us. And Mark, I don't think, has talked to Richard for years, but he goes, we love Richard Paul Evans. Yeah, we'd love to do this. So my point is now the ask was, let's do this all together. And what Richard's doing is he's sending it out to his list as well. And basically the cost to join us is to buy a copy of the book. So that's the non-sexy answer. The sexier answer is, and this is a shorter one, is if you want to interview, let's say, Jack Canfield. So Jack was my first big get. And so if you want to interview Jack, what I did was I went onto Jack's page and I looked and said, who's endorsing Jack? Because he obviously probably respects those. So I should have mentioned, I went to Jack's team first, and they said he's turning down 9 out of every 10 interviews, so it's probably going to be a no. He's not promoting a book. He's not really doing anything right now. And so that was 4 months. Like, it was a no, and then I reached back out, and they said, well, he's still not doing anything, but leave it with us, and reach back out down the road. And so I decided to take a different approach, and I went to Jack's site, and I said, who's endorsing him? And I saw this guy named Dan Sullivan on there. And Dan Sullivan has a thing called Strategic Coach, but Dan's not pushing his name out there in the same way. Like, he's kind of I think by nodding your head, I think you know who Dan is. He's not out there going, look what I'm doing. He doesn't do a lot of interviews.
He's not the flashy guy in the industry, no.
100%. And he's not doing a whack of interviews. I searched and did some stuff, and I noticed that they said on his website, check out his new interview with Success Magazine. Now, I was a fan of Success Magazine. I had an interview style like Darren Hardy, who was the publisher at the time.
Love Darren Hardy, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've interviewed Darren years ago, and big fan of Darren as well. So I went and listened to the interview that was out in the newest issue of Success with Dan Sullivan, and I saw our styles were similar. So I sent a clip from my interviews and said to his team, Dan said in the interview it was his favorite interview he'd ever done in his life. And I said, so I interviewed in a similar style. I think he'd like the show. And they were like, oh, we listened, we agree. So then we got Dan on the show, which was a big get as well. I should mention Dan was really the first big get. And then, but what I did was I actually kept talking to Dan about Jack, because I knew that Jack, I did some research. I knew Jack and Mark, who aren't working together now, but both of them separately also go to Dan's once a year high ticket retreat. And so I said, well, he's a coach of theirs, and they trust him enough to spend that kind of money to go every year to his event, because the one time authors and big names are willing to go on as many shows as they can usually is whenever they have
there's an event. Okay.
Yeah, event or new event.
That I want to make sure the Beehive really heard, because that is a pretty smoking hot strategy. There is a window of opportunity where all this time, literally the 24/7 is set aside for interviews. And for full disclosure, at the time of the interview, we are we're doing this on a public holiday in the United States. I came in for this specifically for you. We even reserved a spot specifically to coincide with the launch. And I do this for multiple reasons, because I'm not stupid either. So I looked at who you are connected with, and I follow the same principle. So I said, if I make this available for Corey, that man will notice. And if the day and time will ever come where I need an introduction or something, I know I've made some deposits, which is a great leadway into your book, The Enlightened Passenger. And we'll talk about this in just one moment. We'll be right back. So, Corey, we talked a lot about the strategy, and I love this so much because it has all these elements of a lot of this spiritual entrepreneurship. But spiritual entrepreneurship, I think, sometimes is being misconstrued as people that are all woohoo and running around in flowy dresses and don't get their act together, and as some sort of a life coach of some sort. So when I talk about spiritual entrepreneurship or spirituality, how would you describe it to someone? Because we just established that you are a badass strategist. So how does spirituality come into what you do?
So this is where this is an interesting question always for me, from the perspective that I was a spiritual skeptic for the better part of my life. I would argue I probably still am to a large degree. And what I mean by that is, you mentioned the woo-woo idea, and I have so many of my clients and really good friends that are what we'll call woo-woo. My wife is woo-woo in the sense that she's a shamanistic healer. She does energy work, Reiki. My mother reads tarot cards. I'm surrounded. And I was a spiritual skeptic. So I would say, like, back then when I was a kid, I didn't know what it meant, or I would have said that's witchcraft. One of the two. Like, I just didn't have a clue. I was I was out. I wasn't in the loop. And so I've been eased into what spirituality means to me which still, the best way I can say it is I'm still not at the level of talking about like astral projection. And I haven't had one of those moments where I astral projected and flew up to the moon and back. And I'm still not there yet. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying I won't get there. And I'm not judging saying that isn't a thing. I'm just saying where my comprehension is at, I'm still at the level of synchronicity, intuition, the law of attraction. Like I'm at that level. I'm not at that next level where people talk about quantum and 5D and consciousness, and I'm going to ascend. I'm not there yet. I understand it all. I don't think I'm ready yet. I'm not there yet. So having said that, for me, when I think spirituality, I think the universe is. I'll say it this way: it's working for me, not against me, and it's happening for me, not to me. So I'm at the level where I recognize, like I talk about it in the first of this new book, having a synchronicity journal. And so I write down when things happen that I'm like, wow, like that shouldn't happen more than once in your lifetime, let alone 5 times in a week. And sometimes more. Just to give you an example from the book, I did this talk at the University of Miami. I have a red poker chip I usually carry around with me that says PMA on it, which stands for positive mental attitude. I did the talk. I didn't have it with me. A girl in the front was really curious about this, and so I had to get a pen for somebody to write our evaluation forms, and the red poker chip fell out. Now, I have multiple of them, but this one fell out. And I saw her standing there. The event was over, and I was like, she was really interested in this, so I should go show her. So I went over. I showed her the poker chip. She tried to guess at what it meant because I hadn't explained what it meant. I just said I carried it around. And then I said, "Do you want this?" And I usually give them out. If I give them out depending on the person because I think it'll be a cool story for some people. Say, "Oh, this I was talking about this. Now I get this poker chip." And anyway, long story short, is she started crying shortly after, and I'm like, "I wonder what happened." And so I asked her, "Are you okay?" And basically, she told me her boyfriend had overdosed 6 months before, and he was in the program, so AA. And where she's at, they have colored poker chips, and I think red is 60 days, and the last poker chip he showed her was a red poker chip. And now I give her a red poker chip. So the meaning to her is this is his way of saying, I'm still watching over you.
Oh, yeah, I just completely felt that. That is a true story. Yes, I felt that physically.
And so that stuff happens to me sometimes 4 times a day. That kind of a story, which years ago, when I was a very much spiritual skeptic, I only saw that happen once a year and I called it a coincidence and moved on. So what I'm getting at is that to me, now I go so as far as to say the universe is working for me and it's my job to notice that and lean in. So for me, writing in the synchronicity journal, I worked with James Redfield, who you mentioned, who wrote the Celestine prophecy on a couple of projects. And he talks in the Celestine about just noticing, telling the universe, I see these and you'll get more of them. So I thought, why don't I physically write them down and then I'll even won't forget them as well. And I noticed that since I started doing that, like I see them so often. Well, that to me is leaning into the universe.
Yes, so let me break this down a little bit so that we kind of like go through this step by step for the audience. So I think that what I'm hearing here is that there's a part about success where we recognize that there is a connection to a higher power, one source God, whatever people want to call it. I don't care, universe. And when we lean into it, suddenly these things are happening where, I always call it getting the download. So when you get the download, you go like, there is something here, but you can't, I mean, it's an intuition, it's a feeling, right? So you can't explain it. But then when you dive really deep into the mindset or the practices of some of the people that are very, very strategic. You do talk about it in your book, the power hour, the positive thinking. Make sure you do that. You have so many concepts, which we'll talk about next in the book. And it seems to me that people that follow these principles look like what they're achieving are achieving it more effortlessly. At least that's what it looks like on the outside. Am I recapping this correctly?
Yes and yes. I used to struggle with that because you get the interview, like again, I get to interview so many people, and I'm like, how do they make this look so easy? Like it wasn't. And I mean, there's two sides of that, right? There's the strategic side, like Gary Vaynerchuk, for people who know Gary is. Gary, people didn't see him for like 5 years, up at 2 a.m. on forums talking about wine. I mean, that's how he built his brand over time. Well, that's the real strategy. Like that's the real grinding that people don't see. Anthony Trucks, a friend of mine, says, you won't see the work that I've done in the dark. You're only seeing the work I've done in the light. And you're judging me by the work done in the light. Like, you're like, I want your life. but you don't want to do the dark work. And I'm not saying everybody doesn't. I'm just saying, it's there's another guy, Eric Thomas, who says, you want my life, but you don't want my grind. And so that's one side to it, that people are putting in the work and you're just not seeing the work. There's that side. So Gary Vee makes it look effortless because he put in 5 years when nobody else would, doing stuff that nobody else would do. So it looks effortless for him now because he's arrived. But what I'm getting at is that I'm talking as well the people like the Jack Canfields of the world who, 600 million books sold and made it look easy. Now, I'm going to say right now, I know Mark and Jack both quite well, but I know Mark a lot better at this point. And I'll tell you, these guys are marketing geniuses. So I'm not just going to tell you that because they tithed and gave back for their book and because they believed in the law of attraction and abundance, they did. I'm not going to say that that's the only reason they were uber successful. These guys knew what they're doing. They're very strategic. They can give you a marketing plan today in 5 minutes that most people would take them 3 years to put together. So there is the strategy side. But I do believe the people that make it look effortless, there's the other side, which is what you're talking about, where they're putting in the spiritual reps, like the power hour that we talked about. Like Jack Canfield says, he puts in 20 minutes in the morning exercising, 20 minutes learning or reading, and 20 minutes meditating. And so if you think about that, I always say that means that when Jack starts out, before you even wake up, not you, just in general, before most people wake up, Jack is feeding his mind, body, and spirit. He's all full, his cup's overflowing. What I'm getting at is that, and this is the part where I overlap, is he is still doing the work. But the work he's doing is the work that makes it look effortless. So I think Jack's put in those hour every day so that now it flows easily to him because the universe knows this is what Jack wants. It's very clear. This is what I give to Jack. And so, yeah, I think realistically, the reason a lot of people make it look effortless is because they figured out how to make it effortless. Like they're not, what would you say? They're not like, I want to say, pushing and pushing and pushing. So they're being detached somewhat from the goal because they put in the work. So then, however it ends up coming back to them is how it's meant to come back to them. And I will say this, not to go too far down the spiral, but I will say, you'll notice I veer between what comes to you and happens for you, but also I do believe that you need to take action. So in my previous book, I talked about the law of action, and I said I think it's right in the word attraction, but I think it's the one that people missed. Like when you watch The Secret, it was really amazing around how to attract, but it didn't say what actions you had to take.
And that was the big critique about The Secret, that people thought they sit fried onion rings on their sofas, and they can't just swish it into reality. And then it had a huge backlash of people, thinking this is nonsense because they forgot or missed the other part of it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. Like I think there's both sides. I think constantly there's a side of you have to take action, but I think also the side you have to believe in the universe. You have to have faith that things are going to happen. I will say what I always found. I always shared this when people. It's funny. I did this when we had this virtual event. We do a live virtual event, and during the event we make an offer. So I'll use terms that not everybody talks about, but we offered a product, and one of the things we wanted to have is a video of people talking about why it's important to take action so that people will get motivated to take action. Because if you don't ask somebody to take action, a lot of times they'll sit there and not do anything and then say, I wish I would have done that. And so I had this video with different clips, and one of them was with Joe Vitale. So Joe Vitale was in The Secret, but also wrote the Attraction Factor, and he's really known as a law of attraction expert. And so what I love is Joe, and I just heard him say it in an interview with Chandler Bolt of Self Publishing School the other day. I was listening to an interview, but Joe said to me in the interview, I think I asked them, what is the number one skill you think somebody has to have, or number one thing somebody has to do to make success happen? Anyway, long story short, his answer was persistence. I found it fascinating that the guy talks about attracting and manifesting, still believes it's important to be persistent. Because with The Secret, we were almost told, like, as long as you visualize it and think about it, you don't have to take any action, really. It's just going to come to you. And I love the fact that the law of attraction guy, says persistent is the most important word in our vocabulary if we want to be successful. So I just found that fascinating.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. I think that sort of in my studies, what I'm really recognizing, and I'm a big fan of Abraham Hicks, is that there is a part where you really have to understand has to be an internal vibration. And the persistence comes from not just the visualization, but also from feeling this particular energy. And our subconscious boycotts us at every step of the way. So it wants us to keep falling off. So unless we keep pushing ourselves into what is this vibration that I can be in, where I can have these thoughts of success and money and family and children and love, whatever that is that you desire, unless you unless you vibrate on that vibration, you have this perpetual conflict and this double binding message that just keeps grinding at each other. And I built and sold a business to Bill Gates. And then I thought, oh, great, I'm done with it. And now I've figured it out and I don't ever have to do the work again. Well, little did I know on what BS that was. And only to come back to that, you say it's a daily thing. You have to do this every single day. That's the grind. That's the constant working on it, to say, giving up control, believing that I can, being in that vibration, and then doing the actions that somebody who has that would be doing, which is absolutely fascinating. So, the Enlightened Passenger, you sent me a ticket.
Right.
And this is a business class ticket, appreciate that, to Enlightenment on flight EP 123 in seat 9B. So tell us a little bit about this. Really, I would describe it as, and I love that you did it as a pocketbook, because when I wrote my book, that was my whole point. I wanted it to be in a woman's purse. I didn't want the big hardcover. I didn't want it to be a big bulky thing. I wanted the chapters to be bathroom chapters, if I'm really honest, right? So I see what you did here. So what did you do with this book?
So, I mean, honestly, some of it was intentional and some of it goes back to this intuition we're talking about. So, the book itself, there's one thing I can't say because it'll give something away. So, I won't go into
No,
detail.
no, we cannot talk about the twist at the end.
Okay. So, I won't talk about that, but I just will say it came from a question that I asked people. And I thought, how cool would that be to turn that into something? And then, so I had the beginning and the end for about a year in my head, saying, okay, I know what this is going to be. I knew it was going to be a fictional book. I didn't know how long it was going to be. I knew it was going to, felt it was going to be a parable. I will say what led it to being a parable in some ways too is that not only parables changed my life, but I was reading a lot at the time. I was reading Augmendino a lot. And so it's a similar size to Augmendino's books. I mean, it's not similar to any themes of his, but it's a similar style to how he writes as well. Also, I was rereading The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. I was rereading The Alchemist. I reread Celestine. So I was in that mode, which is probably what led it to being obviously a parable. But I spent a year where I just didn't touch it. I just knew what the idea was. And every now and then I'd jot down a note. Didn't know what the characters' names would be. In fact, I won't say why, but one of them was changed. You probably know if you know the whole book. But ultimately, I basically said, okay, I know what I want this to be, and then I didn't do anything for a year, and then we went on a family vacation, and my family's such that my wife believes in my work. She's doing similar work, and she's just about to knock it out again and start doing more work like this. We had a child with a rare disorder, so she decided to take a year and a half off, 2 years, while he was going to the hospital a lot more. He's through that now, so we have two young kids. But we went on vacation, and they're big in swimming, and I'm not a swimmer. So, I was born on an island, which is kind of ironic. But anyway, we went to a vacation where we're at a cottage, and so not only did she grant me permission, she said, "I think you should work on that book for the times you don't want to come and do the swimming thing, because we're just going to be in the water. You're just going to either be sitting on the beach looking at us." Anyway, so she said, either take your choice, stay at the cottage and write, or come to the beach or whatever. And so I wrote half of the book in that 2 weeks. And then I left the book again for almost a year. And all I was doing was hacking away and doing like 4 pages and then leave it for a month. It was really weird. I don't usually write like that. And then by the end of that second year, the book was done. And then started the process of, so talk about intentional things. I sent the book out to 25 to 35 people to do a beta reader and say, what do you like? What should I change? That's very intentional. I learned that from James Redfield. He did that with Celestine. He did way more than me. He sent it out to 50 people, and he wouldn't stop until they basically said they couldn't put it down, even if they had to go eat supper. They kept reading. So I learned from that, and I applied that. But as far as the book itself, how it came to life, it came to life as a fictional parable, as I mentioned. It's two passengers on a plane, old guy, young guy. The young guy basically is a arrogant business person, and he's not super arrogant, but he just he's into himself. He makes a
Unaware. Yes, I would describe him as very unaware and sort of very early in his career and full of the traditional ideas of what success looks like.
You just nailed it. That's 100%. And so that's him on the plane. As you know, he bought a ticket in first class. He bought, like, basically the idea, he didn't want anybody sitting next to him. He falls asleep. He wakes up. There's an older guy sitting next to him. He's like, "How'd you get here?" He said, "I was bumped because the flight was full." And he wants to go to sleep, but sees that the older guy's made something financially of himself, and he wants to know how to, because Robert makes a lot of money, but he spends a lot of money. So he wants to know what this guy knows to make more money. And he ultimately learns that it's more than about just money. That's what I would say in a nutshell. And it's shared through Treb's journey, the older guy, these 10 life lessons. Now, if I go meta into the book, it's based on my life in a lot of ways. The interviews that he talks about learning this from Les Brown, it was me in Les Brown's living room that learned the same thing that Treb learns from Les Brown backstage at an event. So Treb is a speaker like me. He's done stand-up comedy like me. His wife, Gina, is loosely based on my wife. Like, it's all linked. The one thing I didn't know, I didn't even clue in as I was writing it, because this is what I mean, some was intentional, some wasn't, is how much Robert was me early in my journey and how much I'm hopefully closer to Treb now, but how much I was pulling from me. So the only difference is I was still very kind. I still wanted to help people and all that, but I didn't know the self-help was a thing. I didn't know that I could do more. I didn't know there was more out there besides me selling photocopiers for a living. So I was living his life, but what I mean is I wasn't as arrogant as him. I kind of Hollywoodized him a bit, and I Hollywoodized Treb on the other end, making him more like Wayne Dyer than me. But I'm somewhere in the middle of the two of them. So it's really my journey you're on. But the hope is that you become the passenger on the journey as well. And so, like I said, there's meta stuff, there's plan stuff. The other thing with the title is the idea I had there was, who is the enlightened passenger? I want you to wonder, because it could be Robert, who's learning more and becomes enlightened on the flight. It could be Treb, who's already more enlightened. But it could also be you reading the book. Maybe you're the passenger. It could be who you give the book to. If you give the book to somebody, now you're the passenger to give the book to them. Like, so what I mean is that who is the passenger was a question I wanted people to really wonder even after they're done with the book. So that's kind of a breakdown of the book. And like I said, the intent behind it was really to show people that we can grow, like that you can learn, you can grow. And through these 10 lessons, how deep I thought those in is I literally booted out a couple lessons because I felt they weren't the lessons I would teach my kids if I only had 24 hours to teach them everything I learned in my life. So the
I
10
love that.
lessons have to be those things.
Yeah.
So hopefully that
And
summarizes it.
I love that. And for your journal, my daughter is a Gina.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. That's amazing.
Yeah, so when you said, Gina, I'm like, "Ah, instant connection." Yes, there's synchronicity for you. Yes, and Gina certainly wasn't a big a name that's very popular, sort of for when my daughter was born, but I named her after the Italian actresses Gina Lollobrigida and Sophia Loren, so she's Gina Sophia for the temper and the beauty and the talent, and she does possess all three.
That is amazing. And I will say, Gina was a name in the book. In fact, I think all the names, but Gina especially was a name in the book that I didn't go, oh, and like go, oh, I look up here, and or my aunt was Gina. Like, I didn't take it from my life. I literally just picked that name. I don't even remember where at this point.
Yes, well, it's a great name, just to confirm that for you. All right, so where would anybody be able to go and find out how to hire you as a speaker or to be involved in BLU or to get the book? So give us the whole lowdown.
So where I would send people, there's two options. I would say one is if you want to grab the book, the best place to get it is off of our main website, because what's really neat about there is we send you some early bonuses that probably won't be available a year from now. And so if you go there, what's really neat is it sends you to the retailer you would buy it from anyway, meaning the links are there. It's just that this way we can send you bonuses. Because if you go buy it off those retailers yourself, we don't know you bought it. We can't send you anything. So if you go to thisisthebook.com, so if you go to the main website and scroll down, it says three steps. It's the easiest steps ever. It's like, pick your one and it takes you right to the page. Come back, enter in your order number and your email, and that way you get instant 5 bonuses. And I won't bore you with all the details, but to say that there's a whole bunch of other bonuses we've added in that aren't even the instant ones. Like, there's the instant ones, but then we have like 7 live events coming up, depending when you buy the book, that you can attend these events. And these are big events, like Janet Atwood and Ken Honda are joining me for an event. We're doing 2 book clubs after the book's launched, where we're bringing in really secret big names. I won't say who. We have our virtual boot camps coming up, where we have like Marie Diamond on it and a whole bunch of other big guests. All these things normally have separate costs, and you get in for all of them for free just by buying 1 copy of the book. So that website I mentioned, go there. What that also does, though, is that gets you into my community. So then you'll get all the other info anyway. Once, if we send you out and say thanks for this, you'll see my website and all that. This way, instead of you having to go to a whole bunch of places, that's the one. But the other side, to make it easy, if you're so inclined and you want to reach out directly to me, this is the other way. If you want to know about Blue Talks or anything along those lines, or just to say hi, I'm going to give my main email address, Corey, Corey, at bluetalks.com. So it's Corey, Corey, at blue, which is BLU, talks, and it's an S on the end.com. So send any info there you want, ask any questions there. If you want to get the book, this is thebook.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Corey. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Obviously, I could talk to you about these things forever. So thank you so much for taking the time. I wish for a successful book launch, and hopefully we get to see each other in person one day. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody else too.
And that's it for us for today. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of the Business Growth Architect Show. And until next time, and goodbye. So appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for listening to the entire episode. Please subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star review, a comment, and share this episode with one more person so that you can help us help more people. Thank you again. Until next time. Goodbye.